Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be part of my end of 2018 content for Avatar. You already saw my top 5 Avatar and Korra story moments video. This is going to be the 2018 Avatar year in review, where I go through all of the merchandise, story content, the stuff that happened this year, and review how good of a year it was or was not this year. And then the final video as part of this series is going to be my 2019 preview in terms of what's coming next year, 2019, in terms of merchandise and story. So that's going to make up my end of year content, and then we'll get into 2019 with the usual stuff. So yeah, this is the year in review video. And I suppose the first thing to make clear is, the way I'll be doing this. I'll have a few sections here as we go through. So the first one we'll be touching on is story content. We'll also have a section for merchandise and like notable news and stuff like that. But there'll be one or two other ones as well. That's the way we'll do it, rather than kind of trying to go through. In January this happened because some months not a lot happened. Other months maybe there was a little bit more that did happen. It'll be a bit exhaustive to try and go through it in that way, so I'll group it together here to be a bit more general. Final point I'll make before getting into it is just that I'm not going to be putting too much weight on just little bits of news that happened over the course of the year. In terms of me creating a positive for 2018 being a good year in terms of news, it's going to have to be a big piece of news, and I'll touch on the pieces of news that I felt were big that sort of defined 2018. Rather than say, oh, the next Avatar comic was announced this year, the next Korra comic was announced this year. They're the sort of announcements you expect to happen each year, that the next comic is going to be announced. So I'm not treating them as being anything particularly amazing for this year. They're just the expected stuff that happens in the year. So let's jump in with the story content. And to me, the story content is, the core of Avatar. Avatar at its base level is a story. It's an expanding universe. And right now, that story's coming from the comics. And so this year, all of the story content came from the comics. We got 3 mainline books and 1 free comic book, all from Dark Horse. And that made up our story content from the year. And this is obviously, for me, as someone who loves the story content kind of pretty much above all else, I'm big into the merchandise as well, but I always, of course, am going to value the story content higher. This is where most of my thoughts on the year are going to come from. So, what story content did we get this year? Like I covered in the top 5 video in terms of story moments this year, we got 3 mainline books. Legend of Korra Turf Wars Part 2, Legend of Korra Turf Wars Part 3, and Avatar The Last Airbender Imbalance Part 1. We also got the free comic book day book for 2018, Lost Pets, which was a Korra free comic. And this one was just a little story about Milo finding some lost pets and helping a man out who had kind of bonded with some pets by giving him some lemurs at the end. There's nothing a lot really to say about that one. And how was the story content? How overall was the content this year? Like I've said many times before, I think this was a relatively weak year in terms of content. There's no real standout moments for most of the comics this year. Most of the moments that I think do stand out tend to just be some nice character moments rather than anything particularly big happening with the plot. Very quickly going through the books, I thought Turf Wars Part 2 was definitely the weakest book of the year. It's very, very dull. Not a lot happens in it. It's where most of the plot from Turf Wars comes out, but it's also where you realize that the plot of Turf Wars isn't particularly great. And then just combined with some of the stuff that Turf Wars has of like Korra's not really interacting with a lot of the characters all that much. We're not getting a lot of great character moments. And then going into Turf Wars Part 3, it's a little bit more eventful because of course it's the end of a series. There's some action happening here. Julie becomes president. It's a little bit more eventful, but still nothing particularly great. It's not terrible. It's not bad by any means. It's just you expect more from the comics, and they didn't really live up to standard. Imbalance Part 1 was a lot more on track for what we expected, and I will definitely give it some praise for that. But again, plot-wise, it didn't really have a lot going for it, and I still have some doubts about Imbalance going forward, but I do think overall it is a much better series than Turf Wars. I love the new creative team of Faith Erin Hicks writing and Peter Wortman on art, and I think they are going to be very, very good going forward. It's just that I think Imbalance Part 1 didn't really have a lot to show off for the most part as a first part of the book. Again, it is, I think, the best book of the year by a good distance, because, again, the free comic book, there's not a lot to say about it, and I think the free comic books this year sort of represents the year very well in regards to it's the weakest of all of the free comics that's come before. The problem it has is that every other free comic kind of has something unique, new, different to say. This one doesn't. You know, the previous Korra free comic is the Korra Naga origin story, how they met. Tylee and Toph, you meet Tylee's sisters. Rebound is kind of a must-read book heading into Smoke and Shadow. Shells is Sokka and Suki, and there's some Kyoshi backstory there, the Kyoshi warrior backstory in that. This is just Mila with some pets. It's got a nice little core at the end, emotional core at the end, with the way he kind of handles things to resolve the book, but nothing to write home about. And that's exactly how the other books feel as well. We've had much better content before, in that The Search told one of the most important stories we've had in a very long time in the comics. The Promise, as the first book, is actually very eventful if you go back to it. The Rift is a very good book with the spiritual stuff as well as the Toph stuff. And then Smoke and Shadow, with like the introduction of Azula at the end, is very impactful. So you can see that the comics have in the past told very important stuff. They can do that. It's not me asking the comics to be something they're not, but I'm getting the sense that like they seem to be leaning a little bit more towards becoming like what you'd maybe expect from a typical tie-in comic, of just some fun character interactions, but there's nothing important going on with the story. I think we can get back to telling important stories, but they have to, I think, really move the books back to being able to do that first. Thankfully, the next Korra comic looks like it's going to do that. Ruins of the Empire looks like it will. And that is a positive from the year. You know, it was announced. You know, we have a new artist, Michelle Wong. We've seen some preview pages already. So I'm positive about that. And combined with the fact that I think Imbalance Part 2 and 3 should really move things along and get us to a nice point. You know, I'm still positive despite the content this year not being all that great. Because, like I said, none of it was bad. It's just, it's a little bit disappointing when you read 3 books this year comprising more than 200 pages of new content, and there's not a lot to really discuss from any of the books this year. And that's the problem. That there's more to discuss in like The Promise Part 1 just on its own than there is in like all the books this year. Like it's very telling just in terms of how discussion worthy some of the stuff is. But like I said, the upcoming stuff looks really good. It's just this year wasn't the best, and because the story content this year wasn't the best, you overall will get a sense that, you know, I don't feel that this year was the greatest overall in terms of Avatar, but we'll move on. So next up we have something that went along completely with the story content, and if you've been following my channel or you've been following the release dates for books over the months as it's went by this year, delays. This deserves a topic all on its own here, because it was a defining part of the year. How many times did different books get delayed? Every single book that was released this year was delayed, and this is coming off a couple of the books towards the end of last year being delayed. All of Turf Wars was delays, of course, and then books going into 2019 are being delayed, and as I'll get into in just a second, it looks like we've potentially had another delay just recently, which is coming off another more recent delay, which I don't think I've talked about in the video just yet. It's getting insane now, to the point where most people don't really trust dates of books when they're announced first. Everyone assumes that, oh, the book's not coming out that day, it's going to be delayed again. And even when it then gets a second date, it'll probably get delayed again. And we're never being told about the reasons for why these delays are happening. And so the point is almost like, why even give us a date in the first place if it's not going to be locked down? And the problem is always, like, for more casual fans who aren't really aware of, like, how to keep up with dates and where to find them, where's the best place to find the dates. They'll see the book announced and the EW article has a few dates for this book and this book. They'll pre-order it or something like that immediately. That date will come and go. They won't have their book. They don't have any idea when the book is coming out. And it just creates confusion, and it's only really the really hardcore fans who follow the dates who are aware of what's going on. And there's only so far we can spread it, and there's only so much we can contact Dark Horse to ask them to be more open about it. And the biggest example of that, I think it just completely justifies having this on the list here as a big thing. In like the last day or two, what's happened? It looks like Team Avatar Tales has been delayed again. The Dark Horse website, as you can see here, is still listing the last date that it had, which is March 6th, 2019, but a lot of other places have either deleted the book in terms of the listing they used to have for it, or else they've changed the date to December 29th, 2020. That's like a 2-year delay, basically, on this book. That is crazy, given that this book was initially announced as having a September 5th, 2018 date. This book should have been out this year. We should have been talking about this book as being one of the books that came out this year. But it got a huge delay of like 6 months. And it seemed like March they set it in stone. They had one of the writers at New York Comic Con this year. And it seemed like, okay, fine, we're back on track. Now this has happened. Now, how much do I believe the 2020 date? I don't really. I think that's just a placeholder while they're trying to figure out a new date. Because the other thing to keep in mind of this, just gets so more complicated, is that Dark Horse seem to be switching the way that their books are released. They now seem to be switching from the books always coming out initially in comic book stores on a Wednesday, and now they're switching it around so that the Tuesday mass market and digital release comes first, and the comic book store date is the same week, it just happens to be 1 day later. So the March 6th date that I have here, I think I expected it to change given their new kind of release kind of thing that they're doing. But my expectation would be that like they delay it by like 6 days or something like that. So it goes from being Wednesday the 6th to being like Tuesday the 12th. To fit in line with the way they do releases now. So I don't get why it's going back to 2020. I'm assuming that just because this has happened and it's Christmas now, they just haven't properly announced what the next date is, and that when we get it, it probably will be something in March or April. That it won't really be a delay as such. It'll just be the new date in line with the way they've been doing dates. But it goes to show how complicated it is to keep track of these books, when it should be the most simple thing in the world to keep track of, like, 3, maybe 4 books a year. Yet every book gets 2 or 3 delays. Some of them are faults and are just like some website making something up. Some of them are just Amazon making a mistake. Some of them are Dark Horse directly changing it themselves. All the while really never communicating with the fan base and only giving a response like maybe once every 2 or 3 delays when someone contacts them. And even that is up in the air. You know, the communication with Dark Horse needs to improve, but they need to set their dates in stone. That when they have one date and they have it. And I get it, you know, some things happen, like because the creative team on comics is only like a handful of people, one person getting sick, being ill, something like that, it does delay the book. I get that it happens. But you can tell us that. Like, if you just say that, if that's the case, like, people can be understanding of that. Unfortunate, everyone wants the book as soon as possible, but, you know, you can't, you know, you have to be understanding of, like, the creators only can do stuff as quickly as they can. But it's stuff that needs to improve, and it's not great to just have all these delays happen, so... well, we'll move on. That was obviously a big negative over the course of the year. I assume it will continue into 2019. But up next we have merchandise. And it was definitely a weird year for merchandise. I think obviously next year is going to be much better for merchandise. This year it was just a bit like we have kind of one consistent thing, and then it's just kind of like random scattered stuff coming out. So we'll start off with the big thing this year, which was the Avatar: The Last Airbender Blu-ray release. Huge positive during the year. Everyone was talking about it. This got so many people back into Avatar. The amount of people on like the Last Airbender subreddit posting that, look what I got, look what I found in the store. It was happening, especially around the release, like daily, like tons of posts. And it goes to show just how popular the show is in terms of how many people remember it. And just something simple like that, like a Blu-ray being mass market released across America and so on, the amount that it must have sold and got people back into the show was really, really cool to see. The release itself, I reviewed on my channel, is really good. You know, you do notice the HD. Obviously, it's only kind of done as much as they can, in that the show's obviously never really going to be widescreen. But you notice the quality upgrade, in part because the DVD was always so bad, just in terms of like the technical way the show is put on discs. This is much better in that front. It has basically all of the extras. I think the only thing it's missing is one of the documentaries that was done a couple of years ago that was on one of the special editions. I think the only weakness with it is that there is nothing particularly modern on it. There's no like updated extras or anything like that. There's no interview with Mike and Brian that like references Korra. There's no mention of the comics at all, and there's no feature on the comics. I think that would have put this over the edge. Just one little feature of a 2017 or 2018 interview with Mike and Brian. Something to just make it clear that to maybe people who only have seen Avatar, that's all they know, that there is this other show, there are comics, there's more going on than just ATLA. But that's a minor thing, because it was a huge positive over the course of the year, having this release finally happen. Hopefully Nick see how popular this is and finally give the go-ahead to do both the Avatar and the full Korra soundtrack. This is something we've been waiting for a while. Like Jeremy Zuckerman kind of teased stuff a little bit during the year, but it didn't happen this year. But hopefully, because of this success, they might bring the idea back up. Next up, Zen Monkey Studios. Huge positive from the end of last year. How did they do with their first full year as, I suppose, a company with the Avatar license? I think it was a bit of a mixed year for them, unfortunately, because I was so positive on them at the end of last year. The positives, of course, are going to be that, one, right towards the end of the year, they did start to put out t-shirts, which they announced they would do, and they look really cool. They haven't put out any t-shirts that aren't exclusive ones yet, or like limited edition ones that were mainly sold at conventions, but just the fact that they're starting to do them is a positive. And then, of course, a lot of the pins that they did put out were really, really good. I think they were let down, though, by the fact that over the course of a full year, I don't really feel like they filled in too much of the character roster in terms of like adding new characters. In that, I think they really only kind of repeated a lot of the main characters. Of course, like the Korra villains they did, there was a Milo one, they finally did a Suki, but then there's a lot of other characters who still don't have one, whereas like Aang has like 4 or 5 pins at this point. You know, Katara now has a second one. And I get it, they wanted to do the Day of Black Sun set towards the end of the year. It's a fitting set to do, but can we get a bit of variety in terms of characters? Like, we still don't have a Wan, we still don't have a Rava, we still don't have a Jinora. There's a lot of Korra characters actually they haven't done. And then some of the other ones for Avatar, of like, as I said, Mei and Ty Lee really stand out. There's none of Ozai as like the main villain. And then I think there was a little bit of an over-reliance on like convention exclusives. I get they end up putting what they have left after the conventions up on their site, but a lot of them are like sets of 3 pins, and maybe only one of them is one you like. A lot of them tend to be sort of like almost framed things, or like they're sets that are a little bit too niche. Maybe there's only one that you want. Whereas I think just do more individual pins, give people that variety. And that one thing I noticed this year was that they did the book 1, 2, and 3 sets, and they had like the pins for the element symbols. Like there's the book 1 water, there's the water symbol, there's the fire symbol, the earth symbol, but it's part of a 3-pin set. Why not do those pins separately? the symbol pins separately. I think those are just the really simple ones that they could do to sell really well. Order the White Lotus symbol, Red Lotus symbol, Rava and Vatu are basically symbols in a way, because their designs are relatively simple and would work perfectly as pins. All of the element symbols, including air. Those type of things, I think, are stuff that they kind of should be doing. Because they were so good at communicating with the fandom at the end of like last year. And I think they've been roughly keeping it up, without maybe giving us as much of a, I suppose, voice in terms of deciding what's next. But I hope it's not just that they're going to keep cycling through the main cast again, where it'll be Aang, Zuko, Katara, Sokka, Toph, Aang, Zuko, all over again. They've already done a couple of them now. Give us the other characters, please. That's and then yeah, I do hope they put out more kind of normal t-shirts and stuff like that. But positive, it's great to have a company that is putting out regular Avatar merchandise that's pretty readily available, well priced, positive still for the year, but more characters, give us more variety. Last thing in merchandise is going to be the IDW Games Pro Bending Arena game. This was obviously a successful Kickstarter that was backed completely, very successfully, with the amount that it was funded by last year. And backers got it this year, earlier in the year, and then it was available, I suppose, officially in stores, mass market, a bit later on in the year. I got a review copy from IDW Games. I have videos about it up on my channel. I think it's a very well made game. It's a fun game. There's lots of strategy, lots of depth to it, especially if you get like the expansion sets and so on. I just think what happened with this was that I think a lot of fans lost track of it after it was funded initially. That most of the updates happened on Kickstarter, and I think the community kind of very much developed just around the Kickstarter, and so the information didn't really kind of get out of just that initial people who are super into the Kickstarter. And so not a lot of people, I think, were fully aware of exactly when the game was released. So I don't think the release was perhaps maybe as popular as maybe it seemed initially. But again, I think because so many people backed it because of how well it did, even if the, I suppose, hype around the official release wasn't as high, there were still so many people playing it just because of how many people backed it. And as I said, I think it's a high quality game. And I look forward to seeing what they do with the license, and that I think they've hinted that they kind of want to do other games. And especially like, not everyone likes pro bending, most people prefer Avatar over Korra. If they do an Avatar game that is a bit more general Avatar, that could be hugely, hugely successful. So, good start, and I'm interested to see if IDW Games do more. So that's that. Then we get into notable news that happened this year. As I said just a little bit earlier on, this is more about the really specific news that happened this year rather than just the expected stuff. So let's jump in with Avatar Funko Pops revealed. This was a really fun thing to follow this year. The official Funko put up polls over the course of the start of the year, like Avatar versus a lot of other Nickelodeon properties. Avatar won. It won the opportunity to get Funkos made, and it won it very well, which gave a good sense of its popularity compared to other popular shows. So that was cool to see. We had a bit of a while where we didn't really know what was happening. Then we started to see leaked product listings, some leaked images, what the exclusives were. Then they finally, just a few weeks ago, revealed the full lineup. And it's a really nice wave of Funko Pops. I know not everyone likes the Funko Pop design, but for me, I've kind of gained an appreciation for the design and stuff like that. And part of it may just be the fact that it's a property that I love so much that I notice all the details so much more than maybe a franchise where I only roughly know what it is. But they stand out as being really, really well designed, and I'm looking forward to actually picking up some of these next year. And the reason I highlight this as a very big piece of news this year is just because it's going to be readily available, mass market, cheap enough Avatar merchandise that is more kind of toy-centric, figure-centric. We haven't had that outside of more expensive kind of figures and statues before, so I think this is big, and like the Avatar Blu-ray, it's going to be this really good sense, I suppose, of how popular Avatar is, to see just how well these sell, how many people will start posting about, I found the Avatar Pops on Reddit or something like that. Just because of how popular Funko Pops are, now having Avatar involved in it, it's going to just be interesting to see how Avatar does throughout the whole Funko cycle of release. So I'm excited for them to come out at the end of January, start of February. But yeah, cool thing to happen right at the end of the year. Next up, Avatar The Last Airbender live action Netflix series announced. I still don't really know what to make of this one. I acknowledge it's a very big announcement in that a new show, a new Netflix show, big budget, Mike and Brian are involved. That's a big piece of Avatar news. It's just, the second you say live action, the second you say it's a live action adaptation of Avatar, you do immediately turn me off personally, just because that doesn't interest me at all. Because you're basically saying different continuity. We're not using this big budget project to make new content. We're doing an adaptation of other content in a medium which in the past, because of the movie, has not been well received, and you're taking a huge risk with. I'm still not overly excited about this. As I've said before, I don't mind the movie. I even though I acknowledge that, like, okay, look, I get why people dislike it so much. I've never had that much dislike for it. And so I assume, even if this doesn't turn out to be that great, I'll get some enjoyment out of it. It's just, I'm not really looking for Avatar content that is like, oh, that was a fun adaptation. I want to see new content. And it just is a little bit frustrating to see Mike and Brian, their first project back after their big break after Korra, is doing this. Like, so I'm a little bit down on this, but I acknowledge it is a very big piece of news that seems to have grasped a lot of people's attention. I was very surprised with how kind of positive the reaction was to this. How many people are excited to see news come out about this, whereas I'm not overly excited about it. But still, I put it in here as a big piece of news because it was one of the most talked about things this year in terms of Avatar from 2018. But for me, the biggest piece of news personally was the announcement of Avatar novels, starting with the Kyoshi novel, The Rise of Kyoshi. It's going to be the first of 2 novels covering Kyoshi's life, and I suppose the implication perhaps is that if these do well, if they continue on with these novels, they will do novels about other characters. And for me, the character who makes the most sense after Kyoshi would probably be Iroh. They've kept his story a secret, a mystery for a very long time. A novel seems like the perfect way to tell that story. And I think it fits. Like, I would, in a way, think Kyoshi's story is would similarly works in novel form, maybe more so than comic, and it's a similar thing for Iroh's. But I'm so excited for this, and it's just the novel idea, and then I think they've chosen a very good topic for the first novel. Kyoshi obviously lived to be 230 years old. There's so many unique aspects about her with how tall, imposing. We know of some key events from her life already. But then you think about it, and then because she lives to be 230, you realize that most of the key events in her life happen within the first 40 years. So what about the remaining 190? What happens during those times? And especially because they're talking about her growing up. What was Kyoshi like when she was younger? How does she get from being just this girl who grows up in the Earth Kingdom to being Avatar Kyoshi, wearing the makeup, forming the Kyoshi Warriors, all of these things? How does that all happen? That's going to be an eventful story, and I'm so glad that we now have novels to back up the comics, and it's not going to be the comics shouldering all of the burden of Avatar story content. We now have novels, and with novels, I assume that means we're going to get depth, and that's what we need right now. So I'm very excited to see the first kind of excerpts from this come out, see what the writing style is like. They've said it's going to be young adult, which some people are a bit cautious about, but I'm actually very optimistic about, because I think young adult I would actually interpret as being a level of maturity above what I would consider the maturity level of the comics to be right now. Young adult to me, I think Hunger Games type thing. And Hunger Games, I think, that has some dark themes in it while still being accessible and readable and exciting. And that seems like the perfect writing style for something like this. It's going to be some sort of a journey over the course of Kyoshi's life. There's going to be ups and downs. I assume tragedy, but also fun. There's going to be romance. We know Kyoshi's LGBT. I think we know she's bisexual. So that's going to be an interesting aspect to see how they cover it, how much they give it a focus or not. And there's 2 books, so they're giving it enough time. The first book's going to be over 300 pages. That's going to be a huge piece of content next year. So to me, this was my most exciting piece of content as someone who loves the lore and the story content kind of above everything. Huge announcement for me. So, in conclusion, 2018, year in review. I feel like it was a pretty average year. In terms of the content release, it was on the weaker side of things, but brought up to sort of the average tier by having those big pieces of news. And those pieces of news are kind of big enough that they make 2019 and beyond look very positive for the fandom and the franchise. Like the Blu-ray, Funko Pops, the new series, novels, all of that is stuff that I think will bring people back in, because all of a sudden it feels like Avatar's growing again. And to me, that's a positive going forward. But in terms of the stuff that came out this year for 2018, the year itself wasn't that great. It just happened to have some big pieces of news. So that's kind of the way I'd put it, in terms of just like it's a sort of hopeful year, while, having its downs, but, giving us hope that 2019 looks like a very good year. And that's exactly what I'm going to be covering in the next video. So the next video is going to be my 2019 merchandise and story preview video. So definitely look out for that one. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the stuff coming out this year. I suppose the stuff that happened this year. What were your highlights? What were your lowlights? What were your thoughts on what I had to say? Do you agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.